I don't ever tell women anymore, sleep when your baby sleeps. I used to tell women that before I had a baby.
Yeah.
And then I had a baby. I was like, that is the stupidest thing to tell women, because they will never shower. They will never eat.
Yeah.
They will never do anything that they need to do for their own self-care if they just sleep when the baby sleeps. Like, that's great, but nothing else is going to happen, and that's just going to add to their load and their anxiety.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to No Place Like Home. I am your host Larissa, and today I am joined by the beautiful Robynne. Thank you for being here, Robynne. I was going to say having us. No, well, I'm having you. You're not having me. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name's Robynne. I'm a mum. I've got 3 beautiful children. I am a nurse, a midwife, an international board certified lactation consultant, and I'm in the process of completing my postgraduate diploma of health in perinatal and infant mental health.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is a mouthful.
Your Jess Prescott introduced us to the term slashies, and you are definitely, a slashie, a nurse slash a midwife slash.
Yes.
That's a lot of study.
It is a lot, and it's a lot with 3 small children, which is why my postgrad is taking me a very long time to complete, but that's okay. I love the content, so it will be worth it once it's done.
And that must be just such a beautiful holistic piece to your midwifery and nursing and the IBCLC, to be able to treat a woman that holistically now.
Yeah, I think so. I think when I started my midwifery training sort of 16 years ago, we didn't really talk about mental health. It was something that really sat under the surface, and over my experience and years, it's become more prevalent. I think it was always there. I think we're just getting better at asking the questions, and it really is a big part of a woman's experience and journey. And I have a real interest in it, because I think that we can't only care for the woman in the physical sense when she has a baby. We need to look at her emotional, her psychological and her spiritual well-being as well. So it kind of brings it all together.
Do you think it should be, like the study that you're doing now, do you think that should actually be incorporated as part of a midwifery?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I had one subject on perinatal mental health when I studied, and it was in my postnatal subject, and it was basically a lecture or a tutorial on postnatal depression, and that was it. There was nothing on anxiety, there was nothing on bipolar disorder, OCD, trauma, nothing about trauma-informed care, and then the impact that has on the baby is really significant. So I think it should absolutely be a subject in itself, on its own, even at the very basic level before, students finish their midwifery training.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Did you always want to be a mum, Robynne?
Yes.
Yeah.
Always. I feel like it was always a really big part of my identity. I think back to when I was even in year 12, we had, the year 12 jumpers, and my school, we went with the Absolute vodka theme, right? I don't know how we got away with it, but we did. And we all had our own slogans. And mine.
Almost like Robynne is likely to be.
Yeah, so it was
sort of
each
vibe.
person was like an absolute something, and I was absolute mum. I don't know why. I feel like it was just something that I don't know, I tend to take care of people, and, I would be the one that would sew the buttons back onto the shirts of the boys when they tore up their buttons when they played footy, or I would always have lunch or something if someone needed to be taken care of. So I feel like it was a really big part of who I was and who I am.
That nurturer.
That real nurturer, yeah.
You are. I know I've certainly seen you,
Thank
at
you.
your time here at home. It's beautiful to watch you hold women in the space, certainly. At what point in your career did you decide to conceive? Did you do your study first or after?
So I went straight out of high school into nursing and midwifery. So I did the double degree, which was a fairly new course at the time. I think I was in the 2nd or 3rd cohort that had started in that training model at La Trobe at the time. So I went straight, very naive, came from a very sheltered community, and was exposed to lots of different environments and socioeconomic demographics. So it was very eye-opening doing my training straight out of school. And then I was 22 when I finished.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is really young.
I was really young.
Yeah.
And then I had been a midwife for a number of years before I had my own family.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you seek out like having that back? I know when we speak to a lot of people on the podcast that are within their healthcare professionals, it informs a lot.
Yes.
Like particularly women, obviously.
Yeah.
How did you go into like, okay, I'm going to start a family now.
Yeah.
This is sort of what I'm going to do. Did you seek prenatal care, prenatal advice?
Yes. So when I did my graduate year in a private obstetric hospital.
Right.
And I loved my time there, and then chose to move on to a tertiary public hospital to get some different and varied experiences with the knowledge that I would always go back to that place I did my graduate year because I had such a good experience.
Okay.
And I did go back there, and I worked there for a very long time in clinical education, and I still work there. And it did shape how I chose my model of care. So I really liked the private obstetric model of care because I liked the continuity of care that it offered. I had built some really wonderful relationships with many obstetricians in my field. I felt really safe.
Yeah.
And I kind of knew that if I had a family, I would have my baby where I worked because I felt like I knew the midwives. So I already had that level of trust coming in. What I didn't expect was that it would take me so long to get pregnant. And then having the access and resources with private health allowed me to access the fertility services that I had needed.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you to fall pregnant?
About 2.5 years. So it was quite a shock.
Wow.
I didn't expect that in my late 20s I'd have so much difficulty experiencing infertility. And I had sort of primary infertility with no known cause. So there was nothing wrong with my anatomy. There was nothing wrong with my husband, but for some reason I just couldn't get pregnant. Yeah.
That's quite a void to sit in, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was really hard. I think that I always knew that it could happen because I was caring for women who had extensive fertility treatment when they came into hospital to have their baby. I wasn't expecting that I would have to spend my day surrounded by pregnancy and women having babies and watching other people becoming mothers when that was something I was so desperate to have myself. So that was a challenge in itself. So juggling work, juggling appointments, all the sort of physical aspects that came with fertility treatment, and then being surrounded by birth and pregnancy and having it like thrown in your face.
Yeah.
It was like a daily reminder that my body was failing me. So, that was the biggest challenge. Yeah.
How did you balance that? Like
so I had incredible people in the workplace. So because I worked within the education team, I had my manager and my colleague who I job shared with, and they knew what was going on. I kept it really private because I'd have to at times leave work to go for appointments and then come back. And I didn't want people knowing. Like I just wanted to keep it really private. I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. So I just wanted to sort of keep it, under wraps, low key. A few people, like our immediate family, knew, and that was kind of it because I didn't want to make a fuss. And it was too hard. It was just too hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you fell pregnant.
I fell pregnant.
Naturally?
No.
Okay.
So we went through, you start off quite conservative. So we started with like medication to try and make me ovulate.
Yeah.
And then that didn't work. And then we had some surgical intervention and that didn't work. And then eventually the specialist said, look, I just don't think that anything else besides IVF is going to be, you know, like we think that IVF will be the best option.
How did that feel at the time?
Relieved. I was really relieved because like I think we tried all the conservative things and they weren't working. And I was at that point, it had been because we had to wait 12 months before we could even see a specialist because I was under 35. It was basically we're not going to do anything until you've been trying to conceive for a year and then we refer you and then they start with all you have to go get tested for everything and then they start conservatively and then that doesn't work and that's why it takes so long. And then when we went through IVF, we had to have a police check and counselling and all these like things you don't have to have a police check anymore in Victoria, but all these processes took about 8 weeks before we could even
get a foot in the door.
Yeah. So, you know, we had our first cycle, which was lots of injections to stimulate egg production, and we got one embryo. It didn't take. And I knew like that was the gut-wrenching part because I was like, we have to do this all over again. And we took a break for a time and then people mean well, but when they say things like, why don't you just go on a holiday or take a break from work or you need to relax or it's just not God's plan. And it's like, I'm not a very religious person, but I'm like, those are really unhelpful things to say.
Oh, they really are.
It just really minimalized the experience for us.
Yeah.
So we put everything on hold and then we went back and did it all over again. And my specialist said, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to play around with the drugs a bit more, but it could release too many eggs, but we're going to deal with the consequences of that. Yeah. And we got 18 eggs, which was amazing. 18 is quite like a special number in my culture. So like in Hebrew, the number 18 is also the word chai, which means life. So it's like it's got a number with a lot of symbolism. And then they managed to get 9 embryos from that. But it took 5 transfers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the 5th transfer. So it's our 6th in total, but that finally took. Yeah.
And then the joy you must have felt.
The joy. I didn't believe when I got the phone call from the clinic to say you're pregnant. I was expecting her to say, I'm really sorry that you're not, like that it hasn't worked. When she rang me, I just said, are you sure you're looking at the right person's blood test? She's like, yes, it's definitely yours. Because you go through this cycle of hope and grief. So you have everything has to be aligned with your cycle and you're just constantly waiting. And then you would, they transfer the egg and then you have to wait 2 weeks. So you wait 2 weeks and then the waiting. And with all my other cycles, I'd started bleeding before the 2-week wait was over. So I kind of knew, but this time I hadn't. And I was like, oh, maybe it's a progesterone or something that.
Yeah.
So I didn't believe it. And I was at work. I remember being at work when I got the phone call and I just started crying and I went, there was no one around in the office. And there was no one around. And I went and my manager was there and I went and told her and she's such a beautiful lady and she is like she's not a hugger and she's someone who doesn't cry, right? So when I went and told her, she just burst into tears and she gave me like the biggest hug and it was just the most magical moment because I think that even though she doesn't display emotion openly in the workplace, she had really been profoundly affected.
The significance
Because she knew how hard
for you
and how hard the whole process had been for me. And she'd watched me start it from the very beginning until that point. And I think it was it was one of those moments where, and then a couple of other of my education colleagues came in and I shared the news and we all just stood in the office and we were all just crying. And it was just really beautiful to have that shared experience. And then I had to keep it quiet.
Oh, no.
But that's okay. That's all right. That was my choice to keep it quiet.
But you still had all this joy within you.
So much joy. And then knowing that but the apprehension of like, what if, that really sat heavy with me. What if I now had to wait another 3 weeks for an ultrasound?
Yeah.
And I was like, I just have to get to that point, because you start thinking to yourself when you go through that experience. And my experience is, seems almost easier than others, because I know some women and families have an even longer journey to getting their babies. But you sort of hold on to the what if, because I don't want to get too excited if I'm going to have.
It's not the full release of
It's
joy.
not the full release of joy. You always have that bit of worry and anxiety that you're holding with you, because you're sort of preparing yourself for, well, like, what if I'm going to go through that period of grief? I don't want to get too excited yet, just in case it all kind of falls apart. Yeah.
That must, like, I don't know, like you just even talking about that now, like I feel that in my gut.
Yeah.
Like it just must be that constant gut-wrenching sort of like just the waiting, the anticipation, I can't imagine that. I said this yesterday to someone else that was sharing their experience with me, and they ended up doing donor because the IVF wasn't working. And just the courage that I think women go through doing IVF it's far beyond, it's another version and another experience of what women go through in order to conceive and fall pregnant. But I think the process of IVF is just so incredibly courageous, because on so many different levels it affects everything that you are.
Yeah. And you have to put your life on hold, because you have to sort of make sure that you have, once you start the medication, you then have to make sure you go for regular ultrasounds, because they have to be checking your ovaries all the time and checking all the eggs and making sure the medication's right. And then it's also supporting your partner. So, often the partners get forgotten about in this whole experience. They're kind of just seen as sitting on the sideline and they're not really part of it. My husband often says to me, it's like we go to our appointments and they would ask, well, how are you doing? But no one asked me how I was doing. Yeah. And like that was really hard. So it's really hard when you're going through your own crisis yourself. Well, crisis is probably too strong a word, but your own challenges. And then they have to kind of be strong for you, but they are also struggling.
Yeah.
So I think they often get kind of forgotten about, which is,
Yeah, you're right. I think they absolutely do. Yeah. Because the immediate sort of, the thing that you see before you is the woman going through everything and injecting herself and having all of these things. So, the immediate response is to sort of just think about the woman. But, you're absolutely right. Yeah. The partners.
And they go through the same like grief and hope cycle.
Yeah, exactly.
That the person who's the birthing person actually who's experiencing the IVF treatment is as well.
So obviously we know you have 3 beautiful children.
I have 3 beautiful children. My first was our IVF baby, and then we managed to conceive our other 2 naturally, which can sometimes happen. Sometimes like just getting pregnant kind of tricks your body, like it ignites something. I don't know what it is. But I think we'd had 3 embryos that we'd kept in storage in the event that if we hadn't been able to conceive naturally, that we would have used them. Yeah. So that was lovely surprise that we didn't have to go through the process with
How amazing.
with our girls. It's going to be interesting explaining to my children about how babies are made and all of that sort of thing. But I think it's we'll explain it as best as we can.
And there's lots of different versions of it,
exactly.
And I'm sure when as our children, get older, there will be additional ways to, conceive and have children. Did you have a birth plan?
Did I have a birth plan? My birth plan was to just have a really positive birth. Yeah. That was all I really wanted. Getting pregnant was so hard. Yeah. And then I was really fortunate. I had a really quite uncomplicated pregnancy. It was pretty straightforward. And I think being a midwife for so long before I had my baby, I kind of knew what to expect.
Yeah.
So that really helped me. Yeah. I knew what labour was, even though I didn't know what it felt like.
Yeah.
I knew what to expect from labour. We still did childbirth education classes because I wanted my husband to do it. So we did the calm birthing, the hypnobirthing course. We did a couple actually. We did one with one of the midwives that was at my obstetrician's clinic who does a really positive birthing program. And then we also did a hypnobirthing course as well, which was run by another one of my midwifery colleagues who now also works for the same obstetrician. And I wanted to do that for myself, the hypnobirthing one. So we did two just so that I felt like really empowered as well.
I find it's really common though. Like a lot of people do a couple of the same class.
Yeah. So it was. And then my plan was I just wanted my baby. So that was
after everything.
After everything, I was like, I just wanted my baby. I was open to whatever was necessary. I picked an obstetrician who I had an excellent working relationship with. He is very proactive in normal birth, low intervention, and I knew that I would implicitly trust him.
Yeah. Which is so important.
He wouldn't make me feel coerced into doing anything. Decisions would always be made together. And he's just the type of person who says it like it is. Yeah. So I didn't need fluffy. I didn't need the soft, gentle to be held. I'm not that type of person. There are plenty of women who need that from their care provider. I needed someone who is going to tell me, these are your options and what would you like to do? And this is the risk. This isn't and how would you like to move forward? What would you be happy with doing? And just made me feel heard, which was really important. Yeah.
So important. We were having quite a big discussion the other day about the birth trauma inquiry report and the findings and recommendations, and certainly feeling heard and feeling safe are two really big things to come out of that women certainly didn't feel those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I know the gold standard is midwifery continuity of care. I know that is the gold standard of care, and I'm a really big advocate for it. But I think for me in my situation, having gone through extensive fertility treatment, my obstetrician had been a really great support through that as well. He knew what was happening.
Yeah, right.
And he was, a wonderful source of support for me. I remember going and speaking to him and saying, I just can't, they put in 2 embryos. I'm just I can't cope anymore. I was begging the specialist, he wouldn't do it. And he's like, Robynne, don't do it. You know the risks. Yes, you might get pregnant quicker, but if you have a twin pregnancy, all the complications that can come with that. He's like, your specialist is right. And I think I just needed that validation from someone who I implicitly trusted. But, he was so nice. He'd see me in the corridors or in the stairwell and he's like, how are you going? And say, oh, look, I had another unsuccessful cycle. And he'd say, that sucks. I'm so sorry. And that's what I needed. I didn't need the fluffy, fluffiness. I just needed someone to go, that's really awful. It must be really hard for you to be at work. Yeah. And that was it. That's all I needed. So I think because I had that trust with him for so long as a colleague,
you felt implicitly safe.
Just so safe with him in my pregnancy.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So good. Were your other 2 pregnancies straightforward
Yes.
and like really beautiful?
Yeah, I was so lucky.
amazing.
Yeah, really straightforward, uncomplicated. Just the the struggle of being pregnant and having other children.
Oh my God.
But
Yeah.
I was really lucky. Really
Amazing.
lucky. Yeah.
Amazing. Your postpartums.
Postpartums. So again, I had really straightforward births.
Yep.
With all 3 of them. Long, spurious labour, which is that, like, you know, that early labour. You know when women say I laboured for 48 hours, but it's like that really early part which just goes on.
Okay.
So I had that really long, latent phase, so that early pre-labour with all 3 of them for a long time.
Yeah.
So it took my body a while to get into labour, and then once I was in it, it was quite straightforward. Postpartum, I was fortunate to have a great village of people around me, supporting me, but I'm not very good at sitting still.
Funny that.
So, you know,
Not a lot of women mothers are.
so, you know, I'm like, everyone laughs. So, because when I had my 3rd, she was born about 3 days before Jewish New Year, and I discharged from hospital early. So I discharged. She was born on the you know, when the Queen passed away, they had that public holiday for So I was, and then it was the football public holiday. So she was born on the Thursday, and I was like, this is really inconvenient and boring. And New Year's in a few days, and I just wanted to be home with my family. So I discharged from hospital early, and there I am at like a family gathering.
I almost
20
don't
people,
want to hear.
3-day-old newborn. And like, what are you
Robynne.
doing here? And I remember sitting at the table and my milk was coming in. And I said to my husband, like, we have to go now. Like, I got to a point where I was like, nah, it was just too much. But then I did it the following night, went to my parents with, 40 people there and a newborn.
My God,
so postpartum, because I had such straightforward births, my recovery was really quick. So physically, but I didn't look after myself very well. I don't like to ask for help.
Oh my God, we've done an episode on why is it so hard for us to ask for help?
I don't like asking for help.
Why do you think that is?
I think because I'm so independent and I like to do things, but also I'm not very good at delegating, which is surprising because as a nurse and a midwife, I'm constantly delegating and I'm constantly prioritizing. So I know that I've got my plan for the day. I have this. Sometimes I have to delegate to other staff to help me or I have to, to make sure that I get as much done as I can in a shift. But when it comes to delegating home staff, I think it just adds an extra layer of mental load. Yeah. So, someone, my mum or my mother-in-law would be like, what can I do to help? And it's like, well, I don't want to have to tell you what to do because if I tell you, that means I now have to articulate what's going on in my brain. I want you to be able to see the pile of washing on the floor and just do the load of washing, just do the dishes in the sink, like that sort of stuff. I don't want to have to tell you to do. But I'm very lucky. I've got a great family network who I had meals delivered. I am a crazy nester when I have babies. So like my freezers were already filled with food before like I went into labour. And I think because I worked part-time and I sort of made the effort to prioritize that. And my second postpartum was predominantly during COVID. So we were stuck at home.
So it was quiet.
It was very quiet. But I really felt for all these first-time mums who missed out on so much. I think that if my second had been my first, it would have been a completely different experience. Because I at least had a mother's group that I had created from my first baby who I was still in contact with. I had a toddler to kind of keep us occupied and that filled our days. And it was hard being stuck at home. And I do feel a sense of loss because I sort of lost that maternity leave. I lost having those couple of days a week that I was so excited just to spend with my new baby and getting to know her and having that real special connection with her. We kind of lost, we lost that part of that maternity leave. Yeah. And then when I went back to work after having her, I went back to work in 2021 just before the big Delta wave of COVID. And at the time, my husband was doing relief teaching and schools were shut. So I went back to work almost full time during COVID. And like that was really different experience for our family. And then my third postpartum, again, I was rubbish at asking for help.
Robynne, there's a theme here.
Rubbish asking for help.
At least you know it, right? At least you've got the awareness.
I'm just a go-getter. I can't sit at home. If the sun's out, I want to be outside. It's really good I think it was just for my mental well-being. And I think it was I was so grateful of having these babies and having a really, uncomplicated pregnancy. And I was really lucky. I had uncomplicated birth. So my babies they fed beautifully. And maybe because I was really relaxed about all of those things, I just kind of took it all in my stride.
Yeah.
And like when I've got two small children climbing the walls to get out the house, it's like, rightio, baby in the carrier, we're out. Like you don't have time to have a postpartum.
Yeah.
Like what is this postpartum when you're juggling a family and trying to run a household?
Yeah, it is. And I think it's also that, I don't know about you, but did you just feel that sense of sort of societal, we just get on with it, we've got to keep going kind of vibe? Or do you just think innately your character is that anyway?
I think it's my character.
Yeah.
I think that, I'd often have people say, was there anything I can do to help? And I'd be like, no, not really. But I would often say if someone was coming over, like my mum or my mother-in-law, I'm like, oh, can you pick up some milk or some bread or pick up the groceries or something for me?
Yeah.
On the way home during COVID with my second, we had none of that. My mother-in-law lives in Queensland. So she she saw my second when she was born, went back home and then didn't see her until her first birthday. So she wasn't around for that whole year, which was really hard on all of us. And then my parents kind of lived more than 5 kilometres, so they couldn't come and help with. So we used a lot of like delivery services to help us through with the physical things that we needed. Yeah. But yeah, I think that it's just it's innately in myself I'm a bit of a go-getter. I don't just sit down and wait for something to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that also comes with my work experience, and particularly when I worked for so long in sort of that middle management kind of role, that you can't wait for things to happen. If you don't go out and ask for it, it's never going to happen. So I just kind of like go. And then at the end of the day, I'll be like, oh, why am I so tired?
Yeah. I wonder why, Robynne.
I wonder why I'm so tired.
Really quickly before we finish, I'd love to know, how do you think your experience has influenced your work?
So I think it's influenced a lot. I would often get asked when I was working as a midwife before I had children, are you a mother? And I'd be like, no.
Midwives say this
and
all the time.
Sometimes you would have that, as though your care is not going to be as good. You don't get it. And I think that's not true. I think there are plenty of midwives who are not parents, who still give the most beautiful care, incredible care, are so woman-centered and so family-centered. So I don't think that being a mother made me a better midwife. I think being a midwife made me a better mother. Ooh. So I think that, having that knowledge really helped my mothering skills. But having a lived experience definitely does help. I'm not going to say it doesn't. It does help. Things like how to juggle toddlers and a new baby. Being able to give words of advice to families to help them through that transition, having lived it, really helps. I would never have thought about having your groceries delivered, having meals in your freezer, having a baby carrier, all those sorts of practical things. I don't ever tell women anymore, sleep when your baby sleeps. I used to tell women that before I had a baby. And then I had a baby. I was like, that is the stupidest thing to tell women, because they will never shower. They will never eat. They will never do anything that they need to do for their own self-care if they just sleep when the baby sleeps. Like, that's great, but nothing else is going to happen, and that's just going to add to their load and their anxiety. So I don't share that.
And we see that a lot here
that a lot,
at home, particularly the no not eating.
Yeah.
Like it's wild how common just
Oh my
mothers
gosh.
don't eat.
So much. Like, I remember there was a day where I made myself a cup of tea and it was just a really hard day. My son was my first baby. He was like 5 weeks old. And it was that point where he started to cry a lot more. And I remember messaging my husband and saying, I don't know who's cried more today, the baby or me. And that cup of tea I made at 9 o'clock is still sitting undrunk, cold. And it's like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I was like, I can't. I need help. Like, I just can't.
Yeah. So you did ask for help, Robynne.
I did ask for help, but it was at that moment of crisis. Like, I shouldn't have waited until it was
it's very common.
That bad.
Yes.
And the other thing I've definitely learned, and that's been my experience of working at home, is the knowledge that I've learned from the people that work here.
Yes.
So I've really, really shifted my information about nutrition and it's really opened my eyes to a much more holistic approach with care that's helped my breastfeeding support that I give families, but also just like physical information. And I just think that experience in itself has really upped my game in the information that I provide families after they've had babies.
That's amazing. You are really quite unique, Robynne.
Thank you.
You're very much a unicorn to me. I think having the intellect that you have in all of the study that you do and who you are as a person, and then to watch the way that you also care and nurture for women, I think is just such a beautiful picture of, that everyone should have a midwife. And I think, I did have one beautiful midwife that really stands out for me. But, I think if anyone gets the opportunity to have you as their midwife, they're in exceptional hands.
Thank you. That's very kind.
I have really loved chatting with you. You're going to come back and we're going to chat about attachment and bonding in our next conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.